This is a podcast from Seven Church, Bristol.
My name is Owen, and I'm just going to share for about 20 minutes, but I want to start, if it's okay, just by pausing and inviting you to just be aware of God's presence. And that's because what we do when we come together like this on a weekly basis is to create a space for us, as Rosie said, to encounter God. And it may be that you might think to yourself, I don't really know what you mean. I don't know what that feels like. But what I want to do is just invite you to become aware. So if you want to close your eyes, feel free to do that. There's nothing magical about this. I'm just literally just going to suggest some things to you. First of all, I just want to suggest to you that God is more present to you than you realize. That God is not distant from you. In fact, there's this idea of God being in his temple, and this New Testament idea that the temple of God, i.e. the place where God resides, his spirit, is in our bodies. And so as you imagine your body, however you feel about your body, the Spirit of God rests within you, is present within you, burning like a flame within you. And as you breathe in, and as you breathe out, as you notice you're breathing in and out, just the air that's going in and out of your lungs is keeping you alive. And you are alive. You are alive, and the Spirit of God is alive in us. In the same way that we are alive, the Spirit of God is alive in us. And often, as Joel and Juliet said, often it's a case of us turning our attention to the Spirit rather than the Spirit leaving us and then coming back to us. It's more that we turn our attention. It's more that we become aware. May our awareness of the Spirit in us, around us, and inhabiting and animating everything that we perceive and enjoy, may we become more aware of God's presence in us. And may the knowledge that God is love, that God is good, that God is safe, that God is secure, that God knows you better than you know yourself. May those beautiful things settle our hearts and our minds. May the peace of God, which passes all understanding, fill our hearts and minds right now. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And may I speak in these words into our experience right now as well. We are continuing our series of talks on rhythms and rituals, and we've been exploring the festivals that are described in Leviticus 22. And these weren't random religious holidays. They were a rhythm designed to shape a people, a new people, a people who had escaped from Egypt. Rhythms that reminded this people called Israel who God was and who they were. And that's what I just invited you to do, to participate in a rhythm, which we do on a weekly basis, which reminds us who we are and who God is. And today we're I think we're on our fourth festival, so there's 7 festivals in all, and you can listen to talks that I've given on the other 3 on our podcast, or you can watch the talks online. But today we're going to talk about the Festival of Weeks. Weeks. It's a strange name for a festival, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about it. But it's also known as Pentecost. And when we hear the word Pentecost, we immediately think of Acts, don't we? Acts 2, verses 1 to 7. And so I'm just going to read that first of all, because this is the Jewish festival of Pentecost that they were celebrating in Jerusalem just after Jesus has died and been resurrected. And when the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. They, meaning the disciples of Jesus. Suddenly, a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. And they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now they were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. And when they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken by the disciples. Utterly amazed, they said, "Aren't all these speaking Galileans?" In other words, just local people with a local dialect. And yet they can speak all the known languages of the world. Now, some people describe this event in Acts 2 as the birth of the church, the Christian church. But long before Pentecost became a Christian moment, it was first a Jewish festival. And these people were Jews celebrating it. The disciples of Jesus were Jews celebrating this festival. It was a rhythm. It was a gathering. It was a celebration. And that should help transform our understanding of Acts 2. Because the Festival of Weeks took place 7 weeks after the Festival of First Fruits. Now, go back to listen to my talk on First Fruits if you'd like to. But 7 weeks, 7 periods of 7 days, which makes 49 days. And go back to my talk on Sabbath and you'll hear more about the relevance of the number 7, which is, by the way, my favourite number. It means completeness. And on the 50th day, after the 7 sevens, the people gathered together. Now, the word Pente has its roots in the number, the number 5 has its roots in the Greek word Pente. So Pentecost means 50th. So the 50th day after the Festival of First Fruits. Do you see? Now, these are principally agricultural dates. Okay? And this is really important because this festival wasn't simply about counting days. It marked the completion of the grain harvest. Now, I don't know, is anybody agricultural here? No? Caleb, by the way, is a farmer. I love telling people Caleb's a farmer. Caleb's our youth pastor, but he's also a bit of a farmer because his grandfather and grandmother are farmers and they have given, well, he now owns part of their farm. So I like to think that he's a farmer. So he's the only one that gets this. Anyone that knows Caleb well will laugh when they think of Caleb as a farmer because he doesn't look like a farmer, but he is. He's a Devonian farmer. Anyway, the agricultural season in the Mediterranean is longer than our agricultural season, okay? So the Festival of First Fruits, right back 49 days before Pentecost, which, by the way, was just last Sunday. That was the start. So they planted their seed in January, February. They would have had a first harvest sort of end of March, beginning of April. And that Festival of First Fruits marked the beginning of the harvest. But the Festival of Weeks, 50 days later, marks the completion of the harvest. And there's real significance there because we need to understand why these festivals exist. They were primarily agricultural festivals. Now listen to how it's described in Leviticus 23, verses 15 to 17. From the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, count off full 7 weeks. If you want to know about a wave offering, you need to go back to the Festival of First Fruits. But essentially, it was the first sheaf of the grain harvest was brought to the temple and it was waved. I don't quite understand the significance of the wave, but it was. And then it says, count off 7 full weeks. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath, and then present an offering of new grain to the Lord. From wherever you live, bring 2 loaves made of 2/10 of an ephah of the finest flour, baked with yeast. I'll come back to that in a minute, but note that, baked with yeast, as a wave offering, again, a wave offering, literally, of first fruits to the Lord. Now, there's something that I want to draw your attention to here. At first fruits, 7 weeks earlier, the people offered raw grain. Now, 7 weeks later, they offer bread. Not the beginning of the process, but the finished work. Grain milled into flour, dough kneaded, bread baked. What began as scattered grain has become something whole, something shared, something nourishing. And I think this is something we should just pause and think about. Because most of us are far more comfortable with beginnings than process. New jobs, new habits, new years, new relationships, new visions. Beginnings are exciting, they're inspiring. But process, well, not so much. Formation, transformation, the slow work of becoming. Those things are harder. We shy away from those things because we live in a world that is obsessed with immediacy. Uber Eats. Who actually uses Uber Eats? Anyone? Yeah. So don't feel shame. Don't feel shame. Who uses Uber Eats? Sorry, I really couched that wrong, didn't I? I don't use Uber Eats very much, mainly because it doesn't operate where I live. There we go. So I was chatting to my son, just as a divergence, who's in Australia at the moment, and he'd come home having had a few beers out on the town with his new work colleagues, and he gets in, and then he's talking to me, and there's a knock at the door, and someone delivers him a McDonald's at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's Uber Eats, isn't it? That's the way it works. So it's kind of like you can get your McDonald's even though you don't go to the shop and pick it up. Netflix. I mean, any live stream TV you like. TikTok. The infinity scroll. Amazon. Same day delivery. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do like same day delivery. I think it's fantastic. There's some aspects of this that you're going to love and some aspects of it you're not. But here's the thing. What it's done is create an expectation of immediacy, that something can be delivered there and then. And it is tempting to want transformation and growth without waiting for it. But almost everything meaningful in life takes time. Trust takes time to develop. Years of faithfulness generates trust. Character takes time to develop. When I was a young man, when I was in my 20s, I wanted character. Right. You can't get it. You've got to demonstrate it for a period of time. You might have character, but can you demonstrate it for a period of time? Well, that's the true test. Healing takes time. I'm a physiotherapist, as you know, many of you. And our tissues take far longer to heal than we think they do. Because we're only interested in the symptoms. But if you really want your cartilage to heal, you've got to take a year. It's not going to take 6 weeks. It's going to take a year to totally heal up. Healing takes time. True love. Love takes time. Faithfulness takes time. And the Festival of Weeks is built around this idea of waiting. 7 weeks, day after day after day. And we can, not really appreciate this in our time of supermarkets and Uber Eats. After a winter of eating all of your reserves, you're waiting for that grain to ripen so that you can have some bread. There's an abundance associated with harvest. Because they didn't have it in the run-up to it. They just didn't have it. So it would have been agony waiting for that harvest to grow slowly towards completion. And that's why the Festival of Weeks would have been important to the people of Israel. Because this festival teaches them something really important. That God is not just present in the harvest. He's present in the growth. He's present in the long middle, the waiting, the ordinary, the unseen growth, the roots growing underground. The Festival of Weeks reminds us that God is often forming us slowly, quietly, patiently, in an unseen way. That's not to say there aren't sudden moments of miracles. Since 18, I've been kind of involved with a local church. I was as a kid as well, really, but in terms of what you and I recognise as church, I would say from 18. And I've seen sudden miracles, I've seen incredible transformations in people's lives. And we celebrate that. We really celebrate that. So that's not to take away from this. But, the greatest acts of transformation have occurred slowly, over long periods of time. And this becomes even more powerful, this image of the Festival of Weeks, this agricultural festival, when we realize that this festival, which was a celebration of agricultural harvest, became to represent something else in the Jewish tradition. So by the time of Jesus, the Festival of Weeks in Jewish culture and history has become associated with the giving of the law to Moses on Mount Sinai, if you're familiar with that. Just very briefly, Israelites have been living in relative slavery in Egypt for 400 years. They get called out of Egypt to traverse the desert of Sinai to what we now call Palestine, and where Israel now is, the geopolitical state of Israel. And what happened was that they came out, and Moses, who led them, had to form them into a nation. God formed them into a nation through Moses by the giving of the law. It was like the statutory framework for how they work, and then also the giving of the festivals, so that the Israelites would have a sense of togetherness and identity, because before this they were a disparate people living in Egypt. So this all happens on Mount Sinai, and there's this incredible picture where the people gather together, and we're talking like 4 million, and there's wind, and there's fire, and there's this presence of God descending on this mountain, and there's earthquakes and crashes of thunder and flashes of lightning, and Moses goes up and comes down with his face radiant and shining. It's something else otherworldly. And it's marked by fire. And suddenly what Luke writes in Acts 2 starts to sound reminiscent of Mount Sinai. There's fire. Do you remember what I read? Fire appears, what looks like fire, and a blowing violent wind, and what looked like tongues of fire separated and came to rest on each of them. Luke sees more than just spiritual phenomenon. He sees God forming a people again, like he did on Mount Sinai. Just as Israel once gathered around Moses at Mount Sinai after the liberation from Egypt, now people gather around the risen Christ under Roman occupation, longing for renewal, for freedom, and for hope. And once again, the Spirit of God descends, and the way it looks like it's like fire on a people, and God forms a people by writing laws onto stone tablets and by writing his presence into human hearts. And that matters deeply, because faith is not just about learning to say the right things. Faith is about becoming the kind of people shaped by the Spirit of God. But don't we all want that to happen instantly? I mean, we've all seen people whose lives have been transformed by the Spirit of God, right? I mean, we talk about baptisms. Often some of the baptisms that are most dramatic are those where people have had conversion experience that are incredibly dramatic. Why? Because they were really lost. They were bound up by addiction. I mean, some of the most powerful, dramatic stories I've ever heard. And I used to be responsible for running Alpha courses in my previous church. And we would have like 50 people on every Alpha course. And probably half of them were part of the local Alcoholics Anonymous group. Because when they encountered Jesus, they found power over their addiction. And they were getting broken by their addiction. The reality is that when we have our conversion experiences, it feels like fire in our hearts. It feels like a whole new vision. It feels like a whole new way of life. And it does happen overnight sometimes for some people. It really does. But you know, over the years of doing this, those dramatic experiences sometimes fizzle out. They don't always stay. Because the transformation, whilst it seems dramatic on the surface, really takes years to be deep in that person's heart. It takes years for that transformation to work right through their life. So we have to be patient. We have to be loving. We have to be kind. The fruit of the Spirit is called fruit for a reason. Because fruit, I don't know if you realize this, grows slowly. It doesn't happen super quick. You've got to plant the seeds. You've got to wait. You can't microwave maturity. Or air fryer it for that matter. You can't microwave maturity. It doesn't happen like that. Love grows slowly. Joy grows slowly. Peace grows slowly. Transformation usually happens so gradually that we barely notice it. Until one day we realize that we don't quite react like that anymore. Or we don't carry anxiety quite the same way anymore. Or we forgive a little bit more quickly than we used to. Or we listen a little bit more deeply. And then we realize that because we've been pressing into encountering God on a regular basis, that we've gradually been transformed. Slowly, but gradually. And I think that's one of the reasons why this image of bread matters so much in this festival. Because bread is transformed grain. Something has changed throughout the process. And maybe that's what God is doing in each one of us. Not abandoning us in our waiting, but shaping us through it. There's another fascinating detail in this festival, and I mentioned it earlier on. The bread offered at the Festival of Weeks was baked with yeast. How many of you know that that's unusual in the Middle East? Flatbread is so common in the Middle East. It's baked without yeast. If you're not familiar with baking, we have our white bloomers and stuff like that because of yeast. Otherwise, it would just be flat, like a naan bread. Okay? But in the Bible and in ancient tradition, yeast often symbolized imperfection. It was yeast had a negative connotation rather than a positive. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, Jesus said. But astonishingly here, yeast is included in this 2-loaf offering in the temple, or it would have been tabernacle at the time, 10 verses of building. Which means the offering of 2 loaves with yeast was not perfect. It contained weakness. It contained an imperfection in their tradition, and yet God wanted it. God wanted it. God does not wait for perfection before drawing near to us, which speaks to that sense that you have to be good enough to be accepted by God, doesn't it? Like, that's a common misconception, isn't it? That you have to be perfect, you have to be good, you have to be like goody two-shoes to kind of be accepted by God, or at least by Christian church. It's not true. This image in the Festival of Weeks shows us that God draws us to himself, or rather comes to us regardless of what we look like. He only comes to us with mercy, patience, and love. And maybe that brings us back to the question again. What is God doing in you while you wait? What is God doing in you over this long period of time? Maybe God is growing gentleness in you, or courage, or surrender, or compassion, or endurance. Maybe the waiting season is not empty after all. Maybe God has not left you. Because that's a temptation, isn't it? When we think that God is not really, we're not feeling God, or we're not seeing some evidence of God in our lives, we just assume that God's left us. And at the top of the talk, I just wanted to make it clear, I don't think the Bible allows us to think like that. Jesus came that we might be filled with the Spirit of God. It was the vision of Joel, the Old Testament prophet. They would be filled with the Spirit of God. Maybe the growth is happening underground in your life, like roots before the harvest. And maybe the invitation of the Festival of Weeks is this: to trust the slow work of God in your life. To believe that the Spirit is forming you, transforming you. Dare I say it, but in our tradition of charismatic evangelicalism, we're so keen to lean forwards and momentum and speed and get as many people sorted out as we can, that it can feel exhausting. I also think it's counterproductive, because I don't think the Spirit of God is in that place. The Spirit of God is in the rhythms and the habits that happen over a long period of time, which is why I want us as a church to lean into this. I want us to lean into being a seasonal church, a rhythmic church. That our purpose is to meet together and hold space where God can transform us and we can become aware of what God is doing in our lives. But not in I say 90% of the time it's going to be in the slow space. It's not in the quick space. There may be some quick stuff. That would be amazing if that happened. But the real stuff that takes root in our lives takes time. And so we're going to just share another rhythm together. We're going to share the Lord's Supper together. We're going to take some bread and some juice, like we do so rhythmically, and we're going to ingest it. And in doing so, you can think what you like about it, but there's something about this act that reminds us of Christ's death, his broken body and his shed blood, but also his resurrection. And I am on a crusade to remind us as a church of Christ's resurrection in the Lord's Supper rather than just his death. Because I think we sometimes focus more on his death than we do on his resurrection. And I want to know the resurrection is better news than his death, right? Because resurrection is what we all want. We want new life. We want restoration, don't we? That's the gospel. So his death was necessary and significant, but it's his resurrection shows us that life goes on beyond death. And that's the gospel of Christ. It's a beautiful thing. So Shelley, would you mind grabbing someone to bring this table over? Is that all right? And just in a very contemplative way, we're going to share in the Lord's Supper. You got some space there. Thank you so much. Very practically, this is grape juice, isn't it, Shelley? Is that right? And this is unleavened flatbread.
Yes.
Is it all gluten-free? No, that's gluten-free. So it says gluten-free here if you are gluten-free. I know that my dad was a celiac, so I know how it feels if you eat gluten. It's not good for you. So gluten-free there, regular here. And this is grape juice, no alcohol in it. Okay. So as we come to communion today, or the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, call it what you want, we come not as a finished people. We come as a people in process. We come as a people whom God is at work in. People being shaped, people being transformed, people learning slowly what it means to have Christ at the center of our lives. So may we become a people who trust God in the waiting. May we become a people who embrace the slow work of transformation. And may the Spirit of God transform us, our families, our neighborhoods, our city, our nation, our world, from the raw grain into the bread with yeast. From a place of relative immaturity to a place of maturity. And may we all do that. As John Wimber used to say, may we grow up before we grow old. And I am growing old, so I need to carry on growing up. So let's do that as we share in the Lord's Supper. Just come and help yourselves. You might want to share it with whoever you came with or someone special to you. And then we'll just put some quiet music on, and it'll be the end of the service because it'll be time to go and release our kids team from there, the children that they've been enjoying having time with. So if you want to come and come to help yourselves, that'll be fantastic.